Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a simple scene card to share with you using My Nicest Friend. So let's get started. This is the adorable Yuzu My Nicest Friend set. I'm going to be using a couple of the images and also one of the sentiments as well. I have stamped the images onto some smooth white cardstock using black ink, and I'm going to colour them using Copic markers. I wanted the fur of the mouse to be quite dark. I wanted quite a lot of contrast on this image. So I'm going in with a really dark brown, which is E49, and I'm mapping out where I think the darkest areas would be. So kind of on either side of his face and also on either side of his legs as well. I'm then blending that out with the E59 followed by the E57. And then for my lightest shade, I'm using E55. This is quite a lot lighter than the other shades, especially when they're all kind of together. So like I say, it's going to give quite a lot of contrast. The outside edges are quite a lot darker than the inside. I also wanted some really bright pink ears, again for quite a lot of contrast. So I'm starting off with RV55, mapping out where I think the darkest areas would be. And then I can blend that out with the RV52, also filling in his nose there and also his tail. And then I can blend that out further with the RV00. I did feel like I lost a little bit of the darker shades, so I am just going to go back in with those just to really darken them up. And then just blend that out with the lightest shade again. And then for his chef's whites, I do want them to read as white, but I do want to add some shadows onto them so that they don't look completely flat. Because the other areas on this image are quite vibrant, I thought that the shadows could be quite dark. So I started off with C5. I'm now blending that out a little bit with the C3. And then I'm going to go in with the C0 to blend that out further. But I don't actually want like a smooth blend because I want these to look like shadows rather than his kind of chef's whites to actually look grey. I don't need to blend them out completely. So I'm just going over the area just to make sure that they're not too harsh. And then for his necktie, I'm using some purple shades to coordinate with the background. So I'm starting off with V17, blending that out with the V15, and then blending that out even further with the V12 and filling in the rest of the areas with that colour as well. And then I can then bring back in the V15 and colour in his buttons. For the cheese, I'm going to use some yellow shades. So I'm starting off with my darkest shade, which is Y17. So mapping out again where I think the darkest areas would be. Blending that out with the Y15, followed by the Y13 and the Y11. And I found that this wasn't quite dark enough. I didn't really feel like I had enough contrast. So I am going to bring in a darker shade. I find that the YR27, which is what I'm using now, doesn't always blend that well with the yellow shades, so I do find that it's quite helpful having a base down first and then adding this over the top. So I'm just again adding some of that darker areas in, and then I can go in with the same shades that I used before just to really blend that out. So the Y17, the Y15, the Y13, and then finish off with the Y11. And then for the cake stand, I wanted this to look kind of like silver. So I'm going in with those same cool grey shades that I used on the chef's whites. But this time I want to kind of blend them out a little bit more. And like I say, make it look like silver rather than shadows. So I used C5, C3, C2, C1, and then blending that out lastly with the C0. And then I did get a little bit of the yellow outside of the lines here on the left hand side, so I am just trying to push that in with the colourless blender. It didn't really work that well, but I'm not too concerned at this point because I know that it's going to get covered up by the mouse. So then for the stars on the cake, I'm using those same pink and purple shades that I used on the mouse. I'm then taking the coordinating Yuzu Mycist Friend Die-namics, placing those over the images and holding them down with some low tack tape. I can then run those through my die cutting machine and then pop those out. Just being careful here because some of that tape did overlap the image. And aren't they just adorable? I'm then taking the sentiment from the Mycist Friend stamp set and I'm going to stamp it down onto a panel of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. So I'm just bringing in my images here so that I can see where they're going to be placed. Make sure that there's enough room for them above the sentiment. Once I'm happy with where I think it's going to end up, I'm going to close the MISTI door to pick up that stamp, but I want to make sure that this is going to stamp straight and also in the middle. So I brought in a piece of plastic here and I'm just going to stamp the sentiment onto that first, make sure that it's straight, then I can remove that piece of plastic and then I can ink up the sentiment using VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is a really nice crisp dark pigment ink, perfect for sentiments. So just inking up that sentiment and then I can stamp that down onto the panel of cardstock. I did set that aside to dry for a couple of minutes and then I can work on creating a simple background. So I'm just going to hold this panel down onto my craft mat and I'm going to use the grid lines on my craft mat to try and place some masking paper down straight. I'm going to use this as kind of like a ground, so I'm actually creating the background rather than the ground that they're going to stand on, but because I'm doing it as a straight line it's going to automatically kind of create a ground and a background at the same time. So I'm taking Wilted Violet Distress ink and an ink blending brush and I'm adding this blending above this line. So like I said, I'm going to create the background and I'm starting off with really light layers to start with and then I can build that colour up. It's a lot easier for me to try and add layers rather than accidentally add too much colour. I do want to try and fade it out so that it kind of fades to the colour of the cardstock at the sides and also at the top as well. I can just bring in my images to make sure that I've got enough of that ink blending, and I felt like I didn't quite have enough on the left hand side, so I'm just going to bring that brush back in and just add a little bit more of that ink onto that side. I can then remove that masking tape and now I've got my background and my ground. I can add some tape runner adhesive onto the back of this panel and then adhere it down onto an A2 size white card base. I'm just going to press that down really well with a piece of scrap paper and then I'm just going to bring in a bone folder here, just make sure that that's really well stuck down on the edges. I can then add some foam tape onto the back of the cheesecake or the cake made of cheese. I can remove the backings off of that foam tape and then before I stick it down I know that I want the mouse to overlap this image, so I'm grabbing some temporary tape. This is the tape that I use when I'm doing die cutting and I'm just going to tape them both together. This is just going to help me adhere them down to make sure that I'm going to adhere them down in the centre. I can also just use this as a guide so that I know where I want to add the foam tape onto the back of the mouse. I could adhere them both down at the same time and that would definitely make sense, but I still thought I would adhere them down separately. But just using the image there kind of taped on just helps me with the placement. Like I say, make sure that they're going to be in the centre of that card. I can then add some tape runner adhesive to the area that's going to overlap the cheese and then I can just pop that mouse down. And he just looks adorable next to his cheesecake that he has made. I can then add some black glaze pen onto his eyes and that's just going to help them pop. And then I can also add some clear glaze pen onto his nose. And then to finish off and add a little bit of sparkle onto the card, I'm taking some Nuvo drops in White Blizzard. This is clear with glitter in it, so once it dries it's going to dry completely clear, but it is going to add a little bit of dimension onto the stars and also make them sparkly. So I just like to add a little bit in the centre and then move that around with a pokey tool. And that is the card finished for today. You could definitely do more with the background, but I did keep it quite clean and simple today. I do like the simplicity of it. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. I apologise for my voice. I am battling a cold, but I do appreciate you watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.